Today I would like to talk to you about my game against the ultra famous YouTuber, streamer, chess professional, chess enthusiast Niclas Huschenbeth, who has almost 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, and I'm pretty sure you have all seen his excellent videos both in English and in German. So this game was part of our match against Bayern München, and in this match actually Thibaut van den Busche, one of our players, managed to win the second game for our team in the season against Klaus Bischoff. We still lost the match, but this was of course a highlight for us as well. Niclas opened the game with the move e4, and I played online against Niclas last year, and there I played the Philidor defense. But Niclas is somebody where I think he prepares very well for the games and who's also quite strong in tactics. So I was looking for a deviation from my Philidor defense and also from the open Spanish, which I played last time against David Navarra. And so I thought about what could be the most solid line that you could play against somebody who's very strong in theory and very strong in tactics. I came up with the decision to play the French. I think the last time I played the French was when I was around 12 or 13. And at that point, I told myself I will never play the French again. But here we go. And after the normal line was knight to c3, I went for the French Rubinstein, which happens after d takes e4. So the French Rubinstein is kind of similar to the Philidor with e takes d4 in that you give up some space in the center, but in turn you have a very solid position with almost no weaknesses. So it's clear that white has a small edge, but maybe it's not that much. This is basically the starting position of the Rubinstein variation. And now Niclas had mainly played the move bishop to d3, which is one of the main moves. He also tried sometimes a line with takes, and bishop to e3. And there were a few games starting with bishop to d6, and it's just a long theory line which I had prepared for the game. Instead, Niclas surprised me already on move 6 by playing the move bishop to g5, which he never played before. And I only knew that there are two moves here. One is h6 and the other one is bishop e7. And then after bishop e7, white is supposed to take on f6. And now at least the more en vogue move, let's say, is the move bishop takes f6, which is played among others by the French specialist Matthias Blübaum. And for instance, now after h4, h6, it's just a different position. But I did not particularly prepare for this, so I didn't want to go there. And instead, I chose for the maybe more solid line with h6, kicking away the bishop. It's also, of course, a very, very logical move. White has a few options. One is to take on f6 and with a knight, and then to retreat the bishop. And this is, I think, played quite often. But instead, Niclas played the move bishop to f6. So I was still kind of prepared for knight f6, but after bishop f6, I was completely out of book. It's a line which has not been very popular in the past, but as Niclas told me after the game, there was a recent game in this line with bishop to d3 between Caruana with the white pieces and Lupulescu with the black pieces. And indeed, after the game, I also found it in the database. So here I was already on my own, thinking about whether I want to go c5 or bishop e7, or maybe just take on e4. And in the end, I settled for taking on e4, but it took me quite some time. And I think this was probably strategically not the wisest choice to spend so much time at this point. Because now, after bishop e4, I went for the natural move c5. And I had basically started thinking if d5 could be an idea for white. But at some point I realized that he's not even threatening that much. So even if I just go queen c7, there should be nothing in particular to worry about. And it's probably also not in white's best interest here to open up the position against the two bishops. So instead, after c5, he came back to the board and he blitzed out the move queen to e2. When the opponent blitzes out the moves in the opening, it's on the one hand nice because you know that you're still in some kind of a theoretical line, but on the other hand, it's of course unpleasant because I had already spent more than half an hour at this point and he was obviously still in book. Here I was now thinking about potential queen a5 check, and this is actually what happened in the game Lupulescu against Caruana. But I thought it's not yet really needed. And to be honest, I thought he would probably go for short castle, but after c takes d, it turns out that he went for long castle. This also has some logic, but I thought with the two bishops it should not be too bad for me. Yet I think the other line with queen a5 check is probably a bit more precise than what I played. In any case, I went for queen b6, another normal move, and now he took on d4 with a knight. Probably to play for an advantage, he should take with the rook here, with the main idea that after bishop c5, he just goes back to d3 and sometimes has this nasty rook swing to b3. So that would have probably been better for him. And after rook d4, maybe I can go for something like bishop e7 instead of bishop c5. And I guess white has a small advantage because he's up in development. But I have the two bishops, and in the long run, there's also a scenario where black could be better. So I think I would still be fine with the outcome of the opening. In any case, instead of that, my opponent went for the move knight takes d4. And now, of course, you have to sometimes be wary of this queen b5 check. But it turns out it's not really a big issue. I just went for bishop to c5. And after queen b5 check, I think I have a very simple reaction here by just taking and now just going for king e7 and knight c7, rook b8. There's not really anything, and in the end he just wasted a lot of moves without achieving anything. So for that reason, queen b5 check in this position does not really help him at all. So he went for the most logical move, which is c3 to defend this knight on d4. Now the question is if I want to go for short castle or for long castle. But before I decide on that, I found the nice move bishop to d7, which still keeps all options open. And it's kind of surprising that white doesn't have anything which is very, very quick here. So he in the end settled for the move rook to d2, which is clearly a little bit more slow. He spent 20 minutes on it, and I guess by that point he was not really happy about his position. I mean, of course, white can't be worse here, but I think I solved my opening problems at that point. Here I again took a little bit too much time. I was considering long castles or rook c8. And after rook c8, I actually calculated a long line, which is kind of funny. I thought you can just go rook d1, bishop a4, and now just knight to b3. Now this looks kind of counterintuitive. Because you can take the pawn, but if I take the pawn, let's say takes, queen b3, then my king is extremely weak, and now with all major pieces still on the board and the opposite bishops and this weak king, the position is just very, very bad for black. So I saw that, and for that reason I didn't go for rook c8. It turns out that after rook hd1, the computer would be just very collected, just go bishop e7, and would say that the position is still also fine for black. Okay, in any case, after rook d2, I went for long castles, which is also perfectly fine. And now after rook hd1, that is probably the point at which I should have played the move bishop to e7. At this point, I was getting a little bit more low on time, and I wanted to do something active, and I think this was the main mistake. I should have just been more patient with bishop to e7. But because white does not have a very clear and obvious plan. Of course, he can always go f4, but then, okay, I will quietly play with something like a6, queen c7, maybe at some point king b8, bishop c8, and I mean, the longer the game goes, the more the potential of the two bishops is going to show. Of course, I'm not claiming to be better here by any means, but I think the position is still fairly balanced, and it's also not completely easy to play for white. So instead, I went for bishop to a4, which is still kind of fine, but maybe a bit too hasty and too provocative. And after b3, I made a huge mistake by now taking on d4. So if I go back, let's say to d7 in this position, things are still around balanced. But yeah, so that's not what I had intended when I went bishop a4. So that was already the start of playing in an inferior way. I had actually calculated bishop c6 here, but this is also quite bad just after simply taking and queen f3, and you get this double attack, and it's obvious that black's position now collapses. So after I had seen that, I didn't really think about bishop d7 for whatever reason, but instead took on d4. And I thought if he takes back, I will somehow trade down and somehow probably get a draw. But given his activity, this is not easy at all. Yeah, in this position, I now calculated the move bishop to b5, and we actually both calculated exactly the same line, namely bishop b5, and now rook takes d8. Takes. I have to take with the king to keep my bishop protected. And now after queen f3, here's a double threat against b7 and f7, essentially forcing me to go bishop to c6. Takes. Now he can't take on f7 because I will take on c3, but he can take here, and now b takes c. And basically, yeah, this is the position which we both saw 6 moves prior to that sequence of exchanges. And we both weren't sure if this endgame is winning for white or not, but we were sure that it's clearly better for white, and it's going to be tricky for black to defend this. Yeah, so why is that? First of all, black has 3 pawn islands. So 1, 2, 3, whereas white has just 2. And these 2 pawns are slightly weak, whereas for me it will be very difficult to create a passed pawn. Yeah, I will be much slower. Also, if both players create passed pawns on both wings, the fact that he will have the passed pawn, which is further away, means that if there's a race, his king can always enter my king side and eventually win a race. So I'm still not 100% sure if this endgame is a draw or whether it's winning. And the computer gives +1, which also doesn't really convince me in either direction. But it's clear that you're not really happy to go for that line, especially as I had thought that rook takes d4 in this position would lead to equality. Yeah, so had I known how bad the position after rook d4 is, I would probably have tried this. But yeah, I didn't. So after takes, bishop b5, I completely misevaluated the position. I thought this would be fine for black, but yeah, Niclas now played in a very, very nice and forcing way, going for queen g4, attacking g7, and so before I started to calculate this, I had thought that I could meet this with queen to c7, but then we will see a line which is quite similar to what we will see in the game. Queen takes g7 and queen c3, and we will get a position which is quite similar to the position which we will get in the game. So we will come back to that. So instead, after queen g7, I played g5. It could be that g6 is a little bit more precise, but black is worse in any case. G5, and now he played another very nice move, queen to f3, attacking the f7 pawn. And I had completely missed this motive, to be honest, this queen g4 and queen f3. And the main idea is that after f5 he can just take. If I take back, he takes, and no matter where I'm going with the king, he just has queen e5 f5 with this lethal double attack, and he will win the rook and the game. And yeah, I had missed this when I played rook takes d4 and when I went into this sequence. So at this point, yeah, I of course realized that f5 is losing, and for that reason I went for queen to c7, which I also thought previously might also work. But also this is actually pretty bad for black, and Niclas now calculates it very, very nicely. I mean, even after other moves than queen f6, white is probably better here, but queen f6 is of course very, very nice and forcing. Now actually baiting me to take this pawn on c3. And I took the bait, I took on c3, but this is just losing. It would have been better at this point to just settle for a quiet rook move like rook g8, for instance. But then, yeah, after, let's say, king b2, it's clear that white is almost winning because he now has all the pieces active. My pawns are weak, and all of his pieces are more active than my pieces. So it's very, very clear that black's position is extremely unpleasant to play, and yeah, will probably also collapse very soon. So instead, I thought to myself, well, show me what you got. I will just take on c3. And yeah, he calculated it in a very nice way. So he now runs in a triangle with his king. King b1, check. And now the move king to c2. I had basically spent all my time calculating with a move king to b2. And then I wanted to go rook f8, queen e7, and then I calculated a line with queen f2, king c3, queen e3, and now try to calculate the moves rook d3 and bishop d3. When in either case it turns out that black has enough for a perpetual. I'm not going into all the lines, but yeah, it turns out that black can hold himself. So instead, in this position, he completely shocked me by going for this king to c2. And yeah, here I realized that I'm lost. The point being, if I go queen e2, what I also did in the game, he can just go king c1. And now, if I play queen e1, he has this, and the square on c3 is covered by the queen, meaning that I have no more checks. And of course, if I take here, he can just take here, and it's game over. So for that reason, after king c1, I now went for the move rook to e8. But here we have a crucial difference compared to the other line in which I could play rook to f8. So if I go rook f8 here, he can just go for queen e7, threatening to take and to give a mate. And now after the check, he still has this queen c3 and king b1, and it's just game over. Yeah, so he's threatening here and here, and I can't do anything to defend against that. So the main big difference here is is that he now has this rook d1, king b1 motive. So he ran with the king in circles and finally brought his rook back to d1, and this is what secures the victory. Yeah, so I now just went for a completely desperate move, rook to e8, but now it's very obvious that white is winning. He just took on f7. I gave another check, king b2, and now rook to e7. He gave a check. After king c7, he can just take or checkmate me on d8, so I have to go back. But now just queen c5 check, and yeah, it's just completely lost. He took, I gave another check, but he now can just go king a3. If I take on d4, he takes on e8. So I played to the mate, check, check, and checkmate. Well, what can I say? I think he really got me in the opening, in the sense that I had spent quite some time to prepare for the Rubinstein, but he still played a line which I had not anticipated at all. And I reacted pretty well to that. Played quite well for the next 10 moves or so. But the problem is I burned way too much time, and this came back to me when I had to make the important strategic decisions in the middle game. And that's also when I became way too impatient with this bishop a4 and bishop takes d4, trying to force matters. And generally in chess, or quite often in chess, it's better to keep the tension, especially in a position where I have the long-term advantages of having the two bishops. So that was just a mistake, and that combined with the fact that in the very end I didn't see his ideas. I could have at least gone for this pawn endgame and tried to survive there somehow, but I completely missed his idea with this queen to g4 and queen to f3. Very strong idea that f5 is not possible, and for that reason he calculated better. He surprised me in the opening, and he of course deservedly won the game. Well, that's it from my side. And of course, if you haven't, make sure to check out Niclas's channel. And see you for the next game.
When you have stress, play chess. When you fall on your ass, play chess for a real deal, for Christian Seel.